All right, before we dive in, just a quick reminder that this explainer is for educational purposes only and is not financial advice. Okay, with that out of the way, hey everyone, and welcome to part one of our three-part series on DEXFI bonds. By the end of this, you're going to have a really clear idea of what these things are, how they work, and why they are so crucial for a protocol like Plasm. So, what are we trying to do today? It's simple, really. We're going to answer the most fundamental question out there. What in the world are bonds? And more importantly, how do they actually make money? We're going to use some really simple everyday analogies to break it all down, so even if you're totally new to decentralized finance, you'll be able to follow right along. So let's start with the trader's dilemma. To really get why bonds even exist, we first have to understand the problem they were built to solve. You see, in decentralized finance, there are no big banks, no brokerages, no middlemen, and that raises a really big question. I mean, think about it. If you want to swap one token for another, where do those other tokens actually come from? Well, the answer is surprisingly simple. They come from regular people, just like you and me. We call them liquidity providers. And what they do is deposit their own tokens into these shared pots for everyone else to use. This big shared pot of tokens is called a liquidity pool. Now, that probably makes you wonder, right? Why would anyone put their own money into a shared pot for a bunch of strangers to use? Turns out there's a very, very powerful incentive. Every single time, and I mean every time, someone uses that pool to make a trade, they pay a tiny little fee. And where does that fee go? It goes directly to the people who provided the tokens in the first place. And let me tell you, these tiny fees add up in a big way, creating a really significant return for those liquidity providers. Okay, so providing tokens earns fees. Got it. But what does any of that have to do with a bond? Well, this brings us to what I think is the most important analogy in this whole explainer, the digital toll booth. I want you to picture all of this trading activity like cars just flying down a super busy highway. A liquidity pool is like a toll booth that's set up right on that highway. Now, when you buy a DEXFI bond, you're not building the road, you're not driving the cars, you are simply buying a piece of the toll booth that collects a small fee from every single car that drives by. And here's the absolute best part. Unlike a real highway, this traffic, it literally never stops. The crypto market is open 24/7 all year long. That means trades are happening and fees are being collected constantly, around the clock, even while you're sleeping. Now, just to be super clear, when you buy one bond, you don't own the entire toll booth. It's much more like owning one share of a company. You own a small slice of a much, much larger pool, and in return, you get a proportional share of all the profits, all those little tolls that it collects. So we know these digital toll booths are collecting fees all the time. But how can you actually tell what your piece of that toll booth is worth at any given moment? In other words, how do you keep score? The answer is something called the bond ratio. It's just a number that tells you the value of one single bond, measured in ETH. The simplest way to think of it is just as your scoreboard. It shows your score in ETH at all times. So for example, as of right now, the DEXFI bond ratio is about 0.0250 ETH. What does that mean? It means if you own one bond, it is currently worth exactly that much ETH. Plain and simple. And if you're wondering what that means in dollars, the math is super easy. You just take the ratio, that 0.0250, and multiply it by the current price of ETH. So with ETH hanging out around $3,137, one bond is worth about 78 bucks. So this leads to the really crucial question, why does that ratio, your scoreboard, ever change? Well, it turns out there are two forces constantly at war inside your bond. When the trading fees are winning the fight, the ratio goes up. But when this other force, something called impermanent loss, is winning, the ratio goes down. And that's the big mystery we're going to solve in our next explainer. So now that we have a solid grip on what bonds are, let's look at a real-world example. The Plasm protocol doesn't just use bonds, it has built its entire ecosystem around them. They are the core yield engine. Get this, the Plasm protocol itself, through its treasury, is a massive bondholder. Right now, it owns over 4,000 DEXFI bonds. And just to put that number in perspective for you, Plasm's holdings make up nearly 19% of all DEXFI bonds in existence. It's a huge position, and as you can guess, it generates a significant amount of income every single day. And here's what happens to all that money. It's a really simple, elegant process. First, the trading fees from those 4,000 plus bonds are collected, generating somewhere between $500 and $700 a day. Second, all of that yield is sent directly to Plasm's defense system, the BBB pools. And third, that system uses the funds to buy Plasm tokens right off the open market, and then burns them forever. And this is the key takeaway right here. This is what we call real yield. It's sustainable income that comes from actual economic activity, people trading tokens, not from just printing new tokens out of thin air. These bonds, they're the engine that powers the entire system. Okay, so let's do a super quick recap of what we learned. We learned that bonds are like owning a share of a digital toll booth. These toll booths earn fees from every single trade, 24/7. The bond ratio is your scoreboard, showing your bond's value in ETH. And finally, we saw how Plasm uses thousands of these bonds as the engine for its entire protocol. And that brings us to the end of part 1. So in part 2, we are going to finally answer that big question we raised earlier. Why does the bond ratio change? We'll explain that mysterious force called impermanent loss, and we'll do it using a simple seesaw analogy that anyone can understand. You are not going to want to miss it. And just as we wrap up, one final reminder. This explainer is for educational purposes, and nothing here should be taken as financial advice. You know the deal, crypto investments can be pretty risky, so always be sure to do your own research. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you in part 2.